All right, Alexander, let's do an update on what is happening in Ukraine on the front lines. The Kursk pocket is getting smaller and smaller, though I have heard reports saying that Ukraine is sending as many reinforcements as they possibly can to try and hold on, or at least to try and hold on to Sudza. That's what I'm hearing. They're trying to build some sort of defense line to hold on to Sudza. We're going to have the battle in Pokrovsk beginning very soon. The Russians are closing in on Pokrovsk. Kurakhove, I believe, can be called to Russia, right? It's been captured by Russia. I think Kurakhove. I don't think the Ministry of Defense has officially announced it, but it's clear that Kurakhove has been taken by the Russians. We have Donetsk as well, which will be captured by the Russians fairly soon, I believe. And then we have the situation in the south, where something is happening.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how it looks.
Yeah.
It looks like something big is going to take place. Maybe not, but what's going on?
I think you summed it up. You summed it up extremely well. Now, briefly, Zelensky gambled massively on the Kursk operation in the summer. I mean, he was losing the war then. He understood that he had to turn things around fast. From a military point of view, he came up with this eccentric plan to send troops into Kursk region. I've expressed my clear views many times.
Did he come up with it, or was the UK?
Well, who knows? Well, that's a very good point, actually, because it's, by the way, it's looking increasingly clear that there was a Western, an American, and a British input into it. The reason the Americans and the British are downplaying their involvement is because there's no doubt at all, to my mind, what the objective was. I've said this many times. The Russians, it's now the official Russian position. It was to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant, just to say, I mean, to make that absolutely clear. But anyway, that failed. It wasn't achieved within the first 5 days, when it was the only window in which it could theoretically have been achieved was in those first 5 days. So the logical thing to do then was to pull out, because the mission has failed. But of course they didn't. They stayed where they were. It's now become a prestige thing. So they're doubling down on it. And there was a long article, I think it was in the Washington Post, or one of the American places, about, the fact that they're continuing to fight on, and they're gritty determination to hold on to the Kursk pocket. So they're sending all their best men and all their best equipment to fight on in Kursk, which of course works completely to the Russian advantage, because you're quite right. This pocket is shrinking in size every day now. One village is captured, one tree line is captured. It's getting smaller and smaller. I mean, it's about less than a third of its original size now. So it looks as if they're going to try and cling on to Sudzha. Sudzha, a small town of perhaps 5,000 to 6,000 people, hardly a big place. A pipeline does pass through it, but again, is it really worth it fighting to control Sudzha? But it looks as if they're going to go on doing that. Now, Putin is saying that more Ukrainian heavy equipment, tanks, armored vehicles, and those kind of things have been destroyed by the Russians in the Sudzha pocket, in the Kursk pocket, than over the entire year of 2023. And that, of course, 2023 include Ukraine's disastrous summer offensive. So if Putin is right, and I suspect he is, by the way, I mean, he's always kept pretty well briefed about these kind of things, then that gives you a sense of how massively expensive, disproportionately expensive, this operation in Kursk has been. In fact, it has been a disaster. It's the graveyard of the best Ukrainian troops and the best Ukrainian armor. It's weakening Ukraine and is helping the Russians advance faster in all sorts of other places. Meanwhile, across the rest of Ukraine, across the rest of the battlefronts, as you said, the contact line, again, you describe the situation clearly. The Kurakhove, the battle for Kurakhove is over. the city of Kurakhove, the town of Kurakhove, has fallen under Russian control. There is still a major industrial building or complex, which is the power station there. We have the usual reports that there's several hundred Ukrainian soldiers, for no obvious purpose or reason, clinging on to this power station. There is some reports that there are underground bunkers beneath it, that they might withdraw into those bunkers. It's the Azov-style story all over again. Ukrainian troops told to stand firm, likely to become trapped. It's just a disaster, and there is no military value to them holding on to the power station. But again, Zelensky is insisting on it, as he did with Azovstal. One senses mostly because of prestige reasons. And in the meantime, they sent one of the brigades of the Azov forces to Pokrovsk. They've been trying to conduct counteroffensives around Pokrovsk. There's been very, very heavy fighting around Pokrovsk. We are at far too late a stage in this war for these kind of counterattacks to be successful. And they launched one counterattack last week, and by some reports, it not only failed catastrophically, but something like 1,700 men were killed or wounded over the course of it. So fighting continues across Ukraine. And you could see that the Russian objective continues to be mostly to destroy the Ukrainian army. I mean, they surround various places. They could complete the battles for some of these places actually quite quickly. Torets, probably, which they now control, I guess, about 80% of it. There's no major fortified positions there. But they know Zelensky, they know Syrsky, they know that Zelensky and Syrsky, given an opportunity, will always reinforce failure. They continue to send troops to fight places, in particular undefendable places, like they're doing in Sudzha, like they're doing in Pokrovsk. And the result is that the Russians are grinding down what is left of the Ukrainian army faster and faster. And Ukrainian commentators are now predicting, and it's Ukrainian, not Russian commentators, are now saying that if this continues in this way for very much longer, sometime around the spring, the entire defense line will simply collapse. Bezuglaya said that a few weeks ago. Now, other reporters closer to the Ukrainian military are saying the same thing.
And in the south?
Right. The south is very interesting because there's a very big Russian military grouping in the south, group of forces, Dnieper. The Ukrainians say it has 130,000 men, which is a big force by any standard. They're commanded by one of Russia's most successful generals, General Templinsky. And for most of this year, they haven't actually done very much. So there's lots of rumors and speculation about what exactly is going on. So on the Ukrainian side, there's been lots of suggestions that Ukraine itself might be thinking of launching some kind of counterattack in this area, might be making another attempt to capture the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. They failed to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant in the summer, so why not try with the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant now, presumably with the same calculus. The trouble is that there's a very, very large number of Russian troops here, according to the Ukrainians themselves, and a very able general. So there have been some Ukrainian counterattacks. They've been so far on a very small scale. And I wonder whether the Ukrainians really are in a position to counterattack against such a powerful Russian force. But anyway, there is some speculation that something like that might happen. But the Russians, for their part, are also doing their own thing. And there are reports that they've now cleared all of the positions on the east bank of the Dnieper, and in the islands of the Dnieper, opposite the city of Kherson. There's some rumors that some big Russian amphibious operation might be in preparation, that the Russians might be planning to return to Kherson city, which of course they abandoned in the autumn of 2022. And there's also reports that the Russians are creeping closer to towns like Kurakhove and Gulyapolye and the village of Malaya Tokmachka and all of these places. And of course, there's an ongoing battle for another village called Velikaya Novosilka, a little bit further to the east. And all of that could be working towards an advance up the river towards the city of Zaporozhye, which is, of course, the capital of Zaporozhye region, and which the Russians say is part of Russian territory. So it could be that these things are in the works. As I said, there are large numbers of Russian troops here. And the Russian defense minister, Belousov, has supposedly said that the Russians expect to clear the entire territory of the 4 regions of the Ukrainian troops over the course of 2025. And that might indeed be what is cooking, that the Russians are preparing an operation maybe in the spring to return to Kherson region, and that they might be in the early stages of preparing an offensive towards the city of Zaporozhye as well. And that would not be surprising, but it's, there's signs of this. There's no confirmation of this at the moment. And in terms of a river operation, an operation to cross the river, I don't think it's going to happen now, because trying to do that in winter when part of the river is covered by ice and weather conditions are very difficult, I would have thought would be too complicated and risky an operation, even for the Russians at this stage in the war.
What do you make of the reports from The Guardian, which claims that Ukraine is using their air defense personnel to now be infantry?
Yeah.
What does that tell you? This is The Guardian, what they're reporting. Actually, we've heard this in the past as well. This is not the first time this has come up, but The Guardian reported this a couple of days ago. And what do you make of the reports which claim that Zelensky is going to pitch to the United States, but to the collective West, specifically to the United States, the Biden White House, that he will lower the conscription age to 18 if he gets more weapons and more money?
Yeah. Right. About the transfer of air defense troops to fight as infantry, about that there is absolutely no doubt at all. Now, the person who first reported it was the dissident Ukrainian MP, Bezuglaya, about a month ago. And at that time, it was not denied. It was sort of confirmed. And if you read the Guardian article, I mean, they discuss this at length. And of course, the Russians continued their air offensive against Ukraine continuously with missiles, with bombs. I know some people were saying a couple of days ago that the Russians had been dropping fewer bombs on Ukraine. I think that was perhaps true for a couple of days, almost certainly because of weather conditions. I don't think there's any real slackening of the Russian air campaign. So what we see is that Ukraine's situation on the battlefronts is now so desperate that in order to try and hold the line, they're having to strip bare even their most essential rear services. And there is no more essential one than air defense troops. And the article in The Guardian went on to say that these are, highly skilled people, and they are being sacrificed, as infantry, because basically there are no infantry. I mean, or there are insufficient infantry. All of that, of course, is leaving most of the skies over Ukraine clear at any one point in time. There was a big missile attack on Kiev a couple of days ago. Only 8 missiles were used. The Ukrainians claim to have shot down 7. Most people who view this think that the Ukrainians shot down nothing, that their air defense really wasn't working. The Ukrainians have basically given up trying to shoot down Duran drones in any great quantity. And all of that does strongly suggest that there is a major crisis in their air defense system. Many of the missiles have been used. Many of the launchers have been destroyed. Much of the personnel has been sacrificed. And I don't think there's any doubt about this. And again, it just emphasizes how bad and desperate the situation has become. And again, to say it straightforwardly, it's going back to the point that you made, without sending Western troops to fight in Ukraine, there is really no solution to this problem. Now, Zelensky has repeatedly said that he isn't going to lower the age of conscription to 18. That's what he has always said. Nobody should take that seriously. What he's clearly doing is he's bargaining. He's trying to get more weapons, more commitments, more promises from the Europeans, from the Americans, that they will send more weapons, more money to Ukraine. We're talking about money. There's a report out that says that 90% of Ukrainian expenditure is now covered by the West. So that tells you how much Ukraine now depends on the West. So anyway, he wants all of this. And he says, look, if you do this, well, I don't really want to conscript the 18-year-olds, but if you do all of that, then perhaps, possibly, I will. It is an unbelievably cynical game. And again, what it tells you, what it tells me, is that Zelensky, once again, is when he pretends that he's acting to protect young Ukrainians, what he and the political class around him are really doing is that they're bargaining the lives of those young Ukrainians in return for more money from the West, keeping the grift going for as long as they can.
I imagine he wants to get some sort of deal like this done before Biden leaves, right?
Correct. Exactly.
Okay, we'll end the video there. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and X. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video update today. There's a link to the Duran shop in the description box down below. Take care.